Welcome to today's Idea to Impact Forum. I'm really thrilled to have you here today. With the weather the way it's been, people traveling where they don't want to be. It's kind of thrown our schedules off this week, and I just knew that today was going to be good weather, and there would be no reason to cancel today's event, and I'm true to form. The sun's shining, it's great outside, and we have got a great panel here today with us. My name's Marty Van Scott. I'm with the Office of Technology Transfer here at East Carolina University, and we have been hosting this forum for this academic year, and to try to bring people on campus and raise level of awareness, if you will, on the innovation process. We started in our first session and just raised the question, can we do innovation on campus? Are we allowed to do this kind of thing? Innovation, entrepreneurship, partner with industry. Oh my, we can do those things. We heard at the highest level from the institution that those are acceptable activities here on this campus. And the point of this whole forum is to continue to march through this process. If we're allowed to do these activities, then what are the next steps? What are some of the things we need to think about? And so we've continued on through this path. Now, in our first forum, we learned that it's okay to do these kinds of activities, and we had a strong message or take-home points from our speakers at that session. And they emphasized 4 things. One was focus on the right things. The other is it's not about you. Dare to be different. Get to yes. Our second forum brought to us words of wisdom from a seasoned innovator and an inventor. And they encouraged us to identify the problem, remain solution-focused, exercise flexibility, and maintain your passion. The third forum last month, we had business experts joining us that pushed us towards thinking about what comes next when we have an idea. Their theme was, there's no single path to success. Use all the free resources you can get your hands on. Don't forget about the customer, what it is they want. And ask who, what, when, where, and how much. Well, today is our 4th forum, and the points that I think the take-home points that you're going to come away with today is passion alone isn't enough to move an idea to reality. We need to test the idea, we need to retest it, and do it again and again. Communication is key. And we need to exercise what I call are the 3 Ps: process, patience, and planning. So we have with us today, I think 4 outstanding panelists that I'm thrilled to have with us that are going to share their experience and thoughts on the process of, is proof of concept. If I have an idea, do I need to prove it before I move it forward, or prototype? How key is that as you move forward in this process? So we have today with us Barbara Muller-Borer. Barbara's going to serve as our facilitator. Wave, Barbara. She's going to serve as our facilitator today. I think she's well equipped for this because she straddles the line between biomedical research and engineering. Barbara came to ECU in 2004 and achieved the role of Associate Professor of Cardiovascular Sciences at the Brody School of Medicine. In 2011, she transitioned to the College of Engineering Technology, where she also serves as Associate Professor of Engineering. Barbara's areas of research interest is focused on stem cell-based therapy, cell-to-cell communication, cardiac electrophysiology, tissue engineering, and computational biology. She has collaborated on grants from the National Science Foundation, the North Carolina Biotechnology Center, Duke University, as well as with industry. Barbara received her undergraduate degree from Tufts University School of Engineering and her doctorate in biomedical engineering from UNC Chapel Hill, and that's where she also completed her postdoctoral fellowship. Barbara has served as co-program director of the interdisciplinary doctoral program in biological sciences here at ECU and is the director of the new biomedical engineering master's program here. We have next to Barbara Yitka Virag. Yitka brings to our discussion panel the perspective of a biomedical researcher, inventor, and someone whose passion has been whetted enough to explore commercialization potential of her patented invention. Yitka will confirm that when it comes to commercialization, science does not stand alone. It's just one aspect of a multifaceted process that really begins with proof of concept. Yitka's research interest relates to regenerative potential of tissue following an ischemic event, such as a heart attack. Yitka received her undergraduate degree from Queen's University in Ontario, Canada, and her doctorate in physiology from Louisiana State University. She completed her postdoctoral fellowship in physiology at the University of Washington and has served as a research scientist with NASA. She's currently an assistant professor of physiology at the Brody School of Medicine. Her research has been funded by the North Carolina Biotechnology Center, and she has industry collaborations. Last year, her patented invention was the subject of multiple business plan competitions in which she partnered with graduate management students from NC State University. Next, we have Ed Howard. Ed is Associate Professor of Engineering with ECU's College of Engineering Technology. Ed received his undergraduate degree in civil engineering from Virginia Tech, his master's in engineering mechanics also from Virginia Tech, and his doctorate from Marquette University. Ed's research interests relate to design analysis and manufacture of advanced composite structures. He has a strong interest in use of design tools such as solid modeling, rapid prototyping, finite element analysis, and motion analysis. In addition to engineering education, Ed is engaged in high school outreach activity. Ed brings to us today the perspective of let's make it happen, because that's what engineers do. They build things, they make it happen. And to demonstrate this process, Ed has brought with him today a MakerBot 3D printer, which we see here working hard over in the corner. And he's also brought Curran Blake with him, a student in the engineering program, who she's going to demonstrate it for us. So thank you both for being here. And then finally, we have Dan Elliott. We wanted to round out our program by providing a design perspective to the discussion. Dan is our newest member on the panel, member of the ECU family who's on our panel today. He just joined ECU as Assistant Professor of Design at the School of Art this year. He came here from Harrington College of Design in Chicago. Previously, he taught at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Dan is a designer that believes graphic design has the power to affect change. He strives to create culturally relevant and authentically designed artifacts that communicate and solve problems. Dan actively collaborates with nonprofit organizations. He received his undergraduate degree in graphic design from Illinois State University and his Master of Fine Arts in graphic design from the University of Illinois in Chicago. You'll notice that there is a common geographic theme with Dan. He likes to live, I don't know if he likes to live, but he lives in the cold reaches of the Windy City. But I'm told he's very glad to live in North Carolina, where up until the last 2 weeks, he did not have to worry about the risk of frostbite when he rides his motorcycle. Sorry about the weather change, Dan. You brought it with you. That's all I have to say. So I'm going to hand the program over to Barbara and the panel and have at it. Enjoy it.
Great. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to start the conversation by asking each of the panel members to talk about what their idea is about proof of concept and how it relates to their specific expertise or interests or their actually ongoing projects. And we can start with maybe you, Dan.
So proof of concept for me in the field of graphic design or even in the School of Art and Design is really about taking whatever it is that we have in our heads and showing it, right? Different than prototyping. Prototyping seems to be part of the process to get to that proof of concept. But a lot of times in the field of graphic design, we work for clients. They'll give us a project, and then we have to kind of solve that in some kind of way, whether that's a logo, a poster, or something that is maybe larger, more tangible. The proof of concept is going through the process of sketching, possibly using a 3D printer, or some kind of other modeling, making by hand, and then showing that how that maybe relates to the solution with the client. This is how big it is. It might be too small or it might be too big, and that's kind of the proof of concept goes through all that, the human interaction of our projects.
And the proof of concept is with that client, basically.
With that client,
right?
yeah.
And convincing them that your idea is the best idea, right?
Yeah, and that it's an appropriate solution, right? We've kind of tackled the issues of usability with like the human factor. This thing will actually function on the console on the car, because we've kind of looked at how the user, the driver in this case, would use the console, right? It's not too far away. The buttons are large enough that they can press it while sitting in their seat rather than having to move over. So it's some of that kind of usability issues, yeah.
How about you, Ed?
Well, I think, like a lot of engineers, I started out working at a large company, and where our products were, what proof of concept was, we're just trying to show, do they work? Do they work reliably? And so a lot of times that's done with a lot of software analysis, eventually coming to a physical prototype, testing, field testing. And so when I went to work for a smaller company that focused on more consumer products, then it was kind of a different way of looking at things. You had to kind of, now you've got industrial design in there as well, so it's not enough to make it work anymore. You've got to make something work that the consumer wants to buy as well. And sometimes that's a little different than how us engineers are used to doing things. But I think when I still think of engineering design, it's mostly that. It's got to function, and you have to prove that it functions. And so there's a lot of steps in doing that, again, starting at the preliminary design with a lot of calculations and analysis. But analysis a lot of times just shows you the things that you can predict, and the physical testing a lot of times will show you the things that you didn't pick up in the analysis. So the two of them have to work hand in hand in most engineering projects.
And how about you, Yitka? Yours is a little bit different, your area in science.
Yeah, using the literature as far as what's been done in basic science, and coming up with a theory about how something could work in the system that you're working in. So I work in myocardial infarction, and I had ideas about a particular protein and its ability to be able to preserve cardiomyocytes in particular from an ischemic event. And so I went from that theory to testing it in an animal model, and to be able to establish proof of concept. Once I was able to show this in an animal model, that's a good demonstration. But to be able to convince people that it could be something that could be potentially applicable or translatable in the medical field would be, and it varies a little bit, but essentially moving to a larger animal, for example, is kind of a proof of concept for that kind of work.
So do you see proof of concept as a process, like a stepwise process, or is it a one-time proof of concept? Yes, it works, let's move on.
Oh, it's a good question. It's complicated in basic science, in complicated physiological systems, and so proof of concept can vary a little bit from one person to another, depending on whether they're following a basic science track or the translational track. So it's not necessarily a one-time thing. I think it's more of a process, but there can be there can be one set of experiments, for example, that could demonstrate that it's feasible and translatable. So it can be a series of steps. So it is a process.
Do you agree with that, or?
I think I agree with that to an extent. Within graphic design, is typically like, we've done this work. Here's the proof of concept. We can show you that it works, or that this will solve your issue. Shall we move forward with making it? Should we print it? Should we produce it? whether it's on digital or tactile or tangible. So it seems to be that's the point where we say this is a concept and now we're actually going to make it.
Do you consider proof of concept and prototype the same or different, or do they kind of fit together? How do they fit together? Maybe you can answer that.
I think prototype's usually a part of the process. We were talking beforehand too that your prototype's not always going to be totally representative of your finished product as well. Even looking at the snakebite kit that they have the examples of over there, you can make it out of one material, something that functionally will work. But now, before you invest the tens of thousands of dollars in making the tooling, you want to be absolutely certain that it works. So in addition to just that first prototype, you may want to make some copies, again, get a more thorough testing before you do that kind of investment. So I think it all depends on the product, and in some cases what the stakes are of failure of the product.
Where in the process of your invention or your design does this come in? Like, does the proof of concept testing come in early on, or when do you start thinking about that? I mean, you're all inventors or, and designers. Where do you think about that?
Well, like I said, for us, the proof of concept would be that point in which we move forward with actually making. So for me, the prototypes are leading up to that proof of concept. We have an idea, we make it as often as possible so we can test it, see where more problems arise. Like I said earlier, where maybe we weren't able to foresee it, we come up with more issues that after seeing that prototype.
So your prototype comes before
Before the proof of concept.
Before
for
the
us,
proof
yeah.
of concept. How about you?
To demonstrate that the protein would be able to preserve cardiomyocytes in a different setting. For example, we were using a small rodent model, and proof of concept, when we were having the discussions about that to see if it would move into a higher level, was to try a larger animal. But there can be differences in that, and so trying to figure out if it's the larger animal would be the definitive proof of concept, or if a different model system within the same animal, or a different tissue within that same animal, an ischemic tissue would work. There's some flexibility in that. And then beyond that, the standard of care for application in the clinic is something that people take into consideration as far as that goes. And so whether the model that I was using at the time was representative of what would be used as a standard of care is something that people take into consideration. And so that was another sort of dimension of having to come up with that definitive experiment that would demonstrate that.
So in your proof of concept, experimental design is important?
It is, absolutely. Yeah. There are certain things that are feasible in smaller animals, or not feasible in smaller animals, that are only feasible in larger animals, and so that can present some challenges, and so there has to be a little bit of a finagling to make sure that you can get the same translatable type of proof.
Is statistical significance important?
Huge. Yep. We had a lot of belief in our preliminary experiments because of the dramatic statistical significance in that, and so that was part of what convinced us that what we were seeing was actually real. And the method that you use, that you apply when you're doing these kinds of experiments, is important too. A lot of the experiments that I was doing, I did blind, and so I had people who were helping me to use the different applications, but I didn't know which one was which. And so that's really important too, because obviously user bias can play into whether something works well or not.
Right. So Ed, you mentioned something about building prototypes and doing some modeling ahead of time, computer modeling and simulation. How important is that in developing the proof of concept?
Well, I think it's critical, I would say, and it's probably changed over the last couple of decades. I think when I started as an engineer, a lot of the computer modeling we did was a lot of times after the fact. We couldn't really use it as a design tool because it wasn't fast enough. you'd run an analysis that would run overnight, then see what you were gonna change, do that, et cetera. So it was kind of a long pole in the tent. Now, because things run so fast that obviously it doesn't cost anything to do your computer modeling. So, example would be like the automotive industry. They have to pass a crash test, but if they find out a problem during the crash test, that's a pretty expensive fix. If they can do a simulation of this, which is now possible, but again, 20 years ago was not particularly feasible to do. They can do a lot of these analyses now, identify problems earlier, and I think that's kind of a key thing. Is that the earlier you can identify a problem, it's kind of like a logarithmic scale. That the earlier you do it, the cheaper it's going to be, and if of course, at the far end, you find a problem after the product's been released, you have to recall, service, et cetera, then it's exponentially more expensive. So getting computer analysis done first, but I think also now that prototyping's become more affordable, more widespread, getting physical parts as soon as possible makes a lot of sense as well.
How long does it take to make a physical part, like with the MakerBot, for example? If you're making say a real part, right?
It can still several hours, but again, things are still limited by size on most of these systems. So overnight, you can usually get a physical model of almost anything that you want to do.
Okay. So how do you measure success with your proof of concept? Anybody want to take that on first?
Okay, I guess for us, if it gets made, we bring the proof of concept. We've made the prototypes. We've kind of determined that this is a successful solution from our standpoint. If we can sell it to the client, or if it gets purchased, there's a relatively new trend in graphic design for designers to go out and say what can graphic design do in our culture to benefit, to enhance our people's lives or our communities. And then they go out and find those problems and then go through all of the prototyping themselves and then try and sell that product or solution to someone that can finance it. So a lot of times that if it's a successful proof of concept is that if that thing, whatever you're working on, gets picked up, or if the client says yes.
How about you, Gekko?
That was tricky. Success of proof of concept was tricky for me to establish in the way that we had a group of people who came up with an idea for what would be the best representative proof of concept. And when we tried those experiments, there were factors that were things that didn't work out, and the factors that were responsible didn't really relate to the protein trial itself. It was more of the animal and the reproducibility in that. But fortunately, because I had continued to do the work that I was doing, but used I used mice, but continued to do different models, that was enough to convince the people that wanted a different establishment or proof of concept that it could be successful, or that it was successful. So there's a little bit of a gray area in
In the development of this protein, or looking at this protein, did the proof of concept idea change?
It did.
It evolved.
It did. It changed. Not intentionally, though. I had just continued to do the research that I was doing and using different models, because other questions were coming up about acute versus chronic injury and things like that. And so when we found out that the larger animal model didn't work, and I went back to the group and I said, okay, this didn't work, but these are the reasons why, and it doesn't have as much to do with the protein as it does with just the reproducibility of that model in generating the injury. But at the same time, we continued these experiments, and I had this data to show them. They were convinced that was the success of a proof of concept.
How about you, Ed?
Well, again, I think engineers tend to look at it, it's like, oh, if it worked, then that's a success. So the thing I was thinking about was a little lower tech than what you were talking about. Was working to develop a softball bat once, which seems like it ought to be a pretty easy thing to do, carbon fiber softball bat, but they had a pretty stringent test on it where they would clamp it and shoot baseballs at 100 miles an hour and had to survive so many hits. And so we went through several iterations of broken bats and came up with something. Then they gave it to some of their players to test and everything. So as far as I was concerned, that was a success. Now, the fact that nobody bought it probably means that ultimately it was a failure in the marketplace. So again, I think as engineers, sometimes we get hung up on that what technically works, we want to consider a success. But again, that was the big transition of going to consumer products. If nobody likes it, then it's not a success either. So.
Right. But proof of concept, it did work.
Yes, it did. I have one in my office right now.
So where along this line, so they went ahead and marketed this
Yes, they
based on
did.
that. Where do you identify failure, or do you identify failure, or do you like stop and go in another direction if the proof of concept isn't exactly what you thought it might be, or you might not get the answer that you were looking for?
I think that when you're doing something that challenges conventional beliefs, that it takes a little bit more effort to be able to convince people of the proof of that concept. And so it isn't necessarily one definitive experiment or trial of something. And there it's going to sound cliche, but there are many ways to skin a cat, right? So there are different approaches that you can take to be able to convince somebody that something is successful.
I think for me, working with a really good team of people that I trust that are willing to do things outside of their comfort zone as well. One of my greatest experiences working professionally is at this small ad agency. We had a web development team. I didn't know anything about programming, but I designed front end. So I was concerned with user experience, not necessarily about the production of it. And the web developer, he said that he loved working with me because I didn't have those restrictions, right? I always said, this is where I really want it to be. Can you do it? And well, I've never done that before, but we'll try and figure it out, right? And so this is all kind of working up into that proof of concept where we can tell the client, this is what we want to do. We can do it. The web developers figured it out. And so for me, working with the team that I trust, I can say, this is what I really want to do. This is how it needs to function. Can you do this? No, it's not possible. Okay, so I have to go back. Or I think I could figure that out. And so then we move forward. Mm-hmm. So where do I say this is not going anywhere is when the people that I trust surrounding me that know more about that topic than I do say, no, you just can't do it.
Right. So you bring up a really good issue about a team, so having a team to help you evaluate. And that is important in graphic design. How about in engineering?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's more eyes you can have looking at it.
So what type of team members are the most helpful, basically? People with the same background or different background, or?
I think different, because there's so much interdisciplinary things that go on that I think you can look at any problem from a lot of different perspectives and see things that sometimes we get tunnel vision as to what we see in our own roles. So I think the more diverse opinions you get, the better.
How about you, Yuka?
I agree, and I would actually, from a scientific standpoint, say both. To have people who are experts in your field that understand what's known and what isn't known about the kind of system that you're working in, but also to have people who are completely unfamiliar with it are great to be able to see things from a very different perspective and can provide valuable feedback in a different type of approach if it's necessary. So definitely both. And having a team that you rely on is essential. You have to be able to trust that the people that are working with you are evaluating things correctly and helping to direct new experiments that need to be done in the right fashion.
So you're talking about this iterative process, and I'm wondering from all of you, about money and finances. So how do you budget for all these iterative processes? It's got to cost money to do these tests, right? To do experimental, especially with animals. I know that costs a lot of money and a lot of planning and building prototypes. So where does the budgeting and the financing come in?
For me, that's been a really big challenge, because the work that I've been doing, as I mentioned, it challenges conventional beliefs. And so trying to convince people that what I'm actually seeing is real has been it's been very challenging. And I think that getting back to how I convey the data and the information and how I represent it, I think has been a critical aspect of that, to be able to talk to people, especially within the school and within the state for North Carolina Biotech Center. Being able to convince them that I know what I'm doing and that it's working really well, and that if I can just have a little bit more to be able to nudge these experiments in a certain direction, that's how things have worked so far for me. So.
Did that factor into your research in the beginning as far as budgeting or finances?
Yes, I mean, obviously our budgets are limited and when I first came here with the startup funds that I was provided from the school, that helped me get pretty far into things. But it's something that is more of a challenge now than it has been in previous decades, I should say. But I think that the open-mindedness to the potential for challenging things that we consider to be dogma has improved more recently. And so I think that if you're able to demonstrate different aspects of what would normally be considered that proof of concept. If you can say it works in this and it works in this and it works in that, I'm not sure if it works in this yet because we haven't tried it yet, then that's what helps propel things along.
Right. How about you, Dan? Because it seems to me like if you're working for a client, do they help fund that or?
Yeah, it's really nice working for clients because that you kind of build that into your proposal, right? So it's going to take this long to and build our ideas. We'll provide you with, say, 2 to 3 different concepts. Sometimes it is working simultaneously on the same project in different ways, figuring out which way is going to be the best solution. And within that, it's typically within the proposal. But what I said before, the designers kind of finding their own problems to solve that they think they can bring some kind of solution. A lot of that is just their own time, so kind of after hours, or if you can find someone to sponsor that, writing grants with the National Arts Council and stuff like that. So it's a lot of grant work, or it's just making
financing
it yourself.
Yeah. How about you, Ed?
Well, I think certainly when I was working in industry and when you were trying to get money for a project, and one thing I think we all try to stress with our students is you got to be able to communicate it well, and you've got to be able to communicate it well to an audience that doesn't have your same technical background. And so a lot of times when you're going for that large budget, you're with the people who control the purse strings. A lot of times you've got to be able to convince them that what you're doing has a reasonable chance of success if you're going to get funded on it.
And that you're the right person to do it.
There you go. That's true.
Right.
Yeah. So your customers may be internal, but you're treating them pretty much the same way that you would an external customer. You've got to sell them on the project too.
To get them to bite, right?
Right.
Yeah.
To move forward. Okay. So as you go through the proof of concept, like I said, how do you assess, your success and failures? And has there ever been a time when you thought, well, this isn't going to work, we need to move on to something else? When do you cut your losses and say, now it's time to, or don't you?
I'm not at that stage yet. I'm going to keep plugging away as long as I possibly can. I believe that this is going to work, and I have lots of ideas to be able to try to prove that. And I'm continuing to write proposals to address different aspects of that. and different comorbidities and things like that. And so there are lots of opportunities for that kind of thing. So I'll keep trying until I'm convinced that it doesn't work, and I'm not convinced. And I think it'll take a lot moving into larger animals and different disease processes and things like that so far. And it's been interesting and surprising because I sometimes when you're doing these kinds of experiments, you expect that one day you're going to do that experiment that's going to backfire and be definitive in that this definitely doesn't work. And I've continually been surprised that we keep getting data that shows us that it is working.
positive.
So as long as that keeps going, I'm going to keep going.
How about you, Dan? Because you have a little bit of different perspective on this.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of different reasons I would say let's stop. Some of it is the feasibility. So like I said before, no, we just can't do that. Oh, okay, is there something that we can do? How do we make this better? And if there is just like, it's just, the technology isn't available right now, that's sometimes a problem, right?
Right.
I had a class last semester that I taught, and their project was called the Innovation Project. And it was exactly like I was talking about before. Find something that you think that design can help community or culture or people's lives, and figure out how you can take a design approach to it. And I would have students bring ideas. Where do you think you can fit in? And sometimes just there's 10 of them out there already. What are you going to do that's better than that? What are those things lacking? Well, Apple Pay really isn't lacking much. Okay, so stop trying to do what Apple Pay is actually doing, because it's really not going to lead you anywhere, right? You don't have the money to back up like they do. So what is it that they're not doing that you can maybe find that you can do as a designer? So in some cases, like, is there a marketplace for it? If other people are doing it better than what you have the ability to do, then don't waste your time in that, and find something that you can be passionate about, and find something that you can actually make.
Right.
That's actually you can actually make into a reality.
So Ed, in industry, I imagine you've had some successes and failures.
More failures than successes, but I think that's pretty common.
Yeah.
And that's a time when, good management has to be able to look at things and say, because I think as an engineer, a lot of times you get so close to your project that you don't want to give it up. But somebody's got to make that calculation. Is it worth going on? Is it worth committing more resources? Or is this a dead end and we need to move those resources to something else? It's hard to answer that question. I think it's a little different every time.
Is that included in the education that students get at ECU?
I doubt it. Yeah. I know as a capstone design students, there's certain milestones along the way where they've got to, of course they can't really give up on their project because
Right.
they want to spend another year here, but I think there are times where you have to say, maybe you have to regroup. Maybe this road you're going down isn't going to get you to where you need to be, and you really, instead of being so focused on one solution, maybe look at some of those you threw out earlier and go
Look
down
at
one of
other
those as
alternatives.
well. Right.
So how important is the timeline as you move toward your idea to invention and this proof of concept? How important is kind of thinking about that timeline and establishing the timeline, or is it not important?
I think time is very important, especially if you've established that if you've gotten to the point where you're very close to the proof of concept, that time is critical, because if you want to be able to move it to those next stages, then you have to make sure that you've got everything lined up to be able to do that. And it's tricky though, because when you're doing something that is in new territory, in adventuring into the unknown, then having to establish a timeline it's difficult to foresee the future when you don't know where things will lead you.
Right.
And that's where having a good team and doing the critical experiments to move you forward in the right direction, and believing your data or not believing your data comes into play, I think.
And you're looking at this protein that may be therapeutic. Okay, so moving it into, say, the clinic, there is a timeline for
Absolutely,
that.
absolutely, and that's something that's a whole other beast, because being able to go through all the clinical trials and make sure that there's not something that we've been missing as we've been testing it that might be potentially toxic in certain situations. There are a lot of other hoops to go through for that. So
So there's a certain part where the investors just want to know that it works, where the scientist and you probably don't wants to know why it works
exactly,
or how it works.
exactly.
right?
It's been interesting and challenging, but fun to try to move those two tracks together, because as an academician, you want to be able to know why it is that it's doing what it's doing, especially when it's going against everything that you ever learned in your education. And so, but there's so much that we don't know, and so to be able to move that forward is a fun thing to do.
Right.
But then again, if it doesn't mean something to people, it's just knowledge, right? So to be able to move it into the realm where it would be able to help people is the driving force for it.
Right.
But that's a challenge too, because there are lots of different milestones that have to be met in order to establish its reliability and feasibility and not toxic and all that kind of stuff. So.
Exactly. So Dan, I have a question for you. So in teaching here at ECU, how do you work that proof of concept into the classes you teach and the courses you teach?
Well, especially for that innovation class that I just spoke about, basically their final presentation is that proof of concept, right? So they're prototyping throughout this semester. They're making. One of my colleagues, Gunnar Swanson, has a quote that every graphic design student knows: "Make it real, make it now," because they sit on the computer and they're there focused on what they're doing, and then the computer will trick you so easily. You print something out, it looks great on screen, and it doesn't work in reality, right? It's something as easily as that these two grays don't work next to each other because there's not enough contrast to actually read the type, right? So that easy fix you can't see in the computer. So the whole semester is built into them making these prototypes and figuring out where all of these problems might arise in reality. And the final presentation, their final is that proof of concept. I've done all of this. This is what I've discovered through this process, and this is my presentation of the project. The things that I've discovered don't work, and how I've solved them, and this is how it will be used in some kind of real way.
So do they use those failures or those incremental processes along the way to make it better, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what is not working? Can you do something to make it better, right? And a lot of that, so the proof of concept there, so for an app, for a phone, right? A lot of the prototyping is sending yourself an image to your phone so you can actually hold it. And instead of looking at a computer screen this far away from you with the mouse, so this button is, I think, large enough to click on. What happens when you hold it in your hand? Can you tap it with your thumb? How do people actually use this device? And so then that final proof of concept is the culmination of all of those prototypes and decisions that they've made.
Right. So just that human interface
The
is
human,
really important.
Yeah, for us, I think that human interaction is the experience is definitive. Yeah.
And that comes really into play with a lot of the proof of concept that, yes, this is going to work because of the humans can actually, people can actually use it, or they can interface with it, and they're like, yeah, that's a cool app, or
Right.
that's a cool interface. Yeah. So I have a couple more questions for you, but I'm wondering if you have any advice for inventors who are starting along the process and maybe at this point where they're trying to determine, well, yes, now I've got this idea, I'm ready to move forward, I need to establish this proof of concept. How do you go about that? I mean, what's some advice you might give to someone who's at that point? Just do it.
I think you have to just try, just give it a try, and learn from your failures. I think is really a valuable lesson too, because if you have an idea that seems to be far-fetched, there's so much technologically possible now, and I think that sometimes we get bogged down with too much information, and not all the information that's out there is right. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that your initial failure is where you should just stop and give up. Back up and try to come at it from a different angle.
What do you add?
Again, I think it all depends on if you have an idea of something that, it's just got to work. Is that the main thing? Then yeah, try it and see if it works. But if it's something you're going to try to sell, then at some point, I think you have to show it to somebody that you trust and people you trust. I guess you can talk about one of the future discussions here is going to be on protecting your intellectual property at the same time. But I think, if it's not going to sell, then you need to find out early. Just like the same thing, if you're going to find out if it's going to work, you need to find out early as well.
So at the university level, where do you find those collaborators or those people that could be on your team to help you maybe move it forward? Besides Marty Van Scott in her office.
Well, that was going to be my first. Ask around. If there's enough people that have been around a while who know people here and there. And again, I think it's we have a wealth of knowledge in a lot of different areas here on campus. And we probably don't utilize it as much as we could a lot of times.
Do you start by asking people just in your department?
I probably would.
Yeah. How about you?
Probably not just in my department. If I wanted to work on a project in a different field or in a different whole other college in the school, I would reach out. So far, I've been reached out to a couple of times and just, can you help us with this kind of design problem, graphic design problem? And I love getting those emails because I love being able to help people with what I know. And so far, what I've seen in my little over a year here has been an openness to collaborate, and not just in the School of Art and Design, but among other people. I went through the Engaged Outreach Scholars Academy with some other people here, and that seemed to be a really good networking piece. And it really showed me that people do want, professors here and others really want to engage across disciplines. So I would just ask, yeah.
If there's a demand for the idea that you have, I think that it's not difficult to find people who would be interested in helping or providing feedback about whether they can help you directly with that or provide counseling feedback on things. And networking within the school is very valuable. For basic sciences, there are a number of conferences that go on every year, and you can find out what other people are doing, things that haven't been published yet, and get ideas about how your work might fit in, and you can talk with other people about that kind of thing. And so networking with others that are in the same discipline as you is a good resource as well. And I think that searching for people that aren't so focused on just one part of their work. If you can get feedback from people that are outside of your discipline as to feasibility or interest, it's so valuable to get feedback from people like that, because they see things that often, when you're so focused on the minutia of what it is that you're looking at, you tend to forget how things fit into the big picture. And so I will talk to anybody who listens.
And you have outside collaborators
I do.
at other universities.
UNC Chapel Hill in particular, and there have been people who have, not that I've ever given up on what it is that I'm working on, but there have been people who actually push me even harder than I would normally push myself. And I think that that's been very valuable in keeping my momentum going.
So do you have any advice for anyone in this room or anyone who may watch this about how to proceed? Like, what's the best way to proceed with proof of concept?
Don't stop. From my experience, the projects that I have waited on and not really kind of pushed forward on, either they just lose momentum and kind of peter out, in which case maybe you just didn't have enough passion to kind of follow through with it in the first place. But really continue on. If you seem to hit a roadblock, then how do you keep moving past that specific roadblock?
Right.
But if it stalls up, projects are really hard to get back going.
So if you have a project that maybe the technology is not there yet, should that be something that you shouldn't pursue, or do you think you should still pursue some of those ideas? I mean, technology moves pretty fast these days. I don't know, based on your experience.
I mean, if we're talking about transportation, or Star Trek style transporting your body, then that's probably not going to be here for a while. But I think if it's within the computer, or if it's for us programming, if I have an idea for an app or a website, there's someone that can figure it out. Like I said, the computers are going so fast now that I think in that respect, technology isn't that much of a hindrance in my field right now. So find people that can help you. Yeah.
How about you, Ed?
Yeah, again, my standard answer, it all depends. Depends on what you're doing, and I think there's not one specific answer. I know one of the book I really like on product design at the very beginning talks about some well-known companies and their design process, and they're all different, and it all depends on what they're doing. An automotive manufacturer might start at the top end of what the car ought to look like, work their way down to the details, and then back up again. But there are other companies that have ideas and have no idea of how that's going to be applied, and find out 10 or 20 years later they've been sitting on a gold mine because they've developed that idea. So it really, it all depends.
Depends on your passion.
Depends on your passion, and depends on what it is that you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Bet you get there.
Perseverance. Because there are always going to be people who are going to tell you that they don't believe that what you're doing is real or possible. But if you believe it, you have to keep plugging away and prove them wrong.
Okay, so I think unless you have some other advice, I think maybe we'll open it up to questions.
I heard a lot of really good points here. How do you pay for these kinds of things? At least in my world, we call it OPM, other people's money. And you have to figure out how to get other people's money. And to get other people's money, you have to be able to tell the story. That's where communication comes in. So if you can't tell an engaging and convincing story, then why should they invest? In the business world, we call it investment. I think in a grant world, it's, did you get the grant? But it's really an investment. We do have resources here on campus. I think that sometimes we keep them a secret. I think oftentimes my office technology transfer is a secret. The Small Business Technology Development Center is located on campus, and they provide a wealth of valuable information on sort of the business side of taking a project from idea to a product. One of my favorite resources on campus is the engineering program. We've got wonderful engineers. We've got several in the room, so I appreciate you all being here. But their students do capstone projects, and they are actively looking for projects that are capstone worthy, that these students can learn how to develop something, solve that problem, if you will. And they're always looking for problems and projects and judges. So if you want to be a judge, you can do that. I'm sure there's other disciplines on campus that offer capstone opportunities as well. We find a lot of our inventions that are disclosed to us through the Office of Technology Transfer are ideas where someone has got a little bit of data that seems to indicate that they can cure a disease in a cellular model or in a mouse model. Now, I don't know about you, but mice don't have really deep pockets. There's not a big market in curing disease in mice. So we have to look for those partners that can help us develop those advanced animal models and maybe go towards more of a primate model, a higher level primate model and such. And one of the things that we look to is, as bad as it may sound kind of cruel. We want to kill a project as quick as possible, yet because we've not killed yours. Because it's an investment. And is that where we need to put our resources? So passion and perseverance are key. They're very important. And at some point, like Ed said, the company's going to come back and say, good project, not a market, we're not going there, and pull the plug. So those are some of the things that I took away from the conversation. I do have one question. I don't know if we have any others here, but here's one. It says, once you identify a need, is there a theory or model to guide the steps towards development of an idea? And that may vary depending on the discipline.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies have their own process model that sometimes they keep very, very close to the vest too, because it is a proprietary kind of thing as to how they would go from step A to step B. But a lot of companies that do a lot of product development have really tried to make that as a procedure that they follow every time.
Mm-hmm. There is, I guess, is just the process of design, so brainstorming, all the way through kind of prototyping and testing. Communication with the client is a big one. So there is kind of a process, but it's not necessarily 1, 2, 3. Sometimes it goes 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2. So and sometimes you can even skip a step altogether. So there's no real kind of set in stone process.
I've learned the word pivot. I thought it was a pretty cool word. I had to go to an engineering conference because I'd never really heard of it before. Where it's kind of like the Mario Brothers game. You know, you go one way and you run into a roadblock, and you turn and go this way and you run into a roadblock. Pivot. Have you learned more from success or failure?
Definitely failure. I mean, when you have a success, it encourages you to keep going. But nothing is more stimulating to keep you going than failure, because you need to prove yourself and your ideas. So, absolutely.
We have a class now on engineering case studies, and we try to look at great successes and failures, but it's probably 75% failures, because not only are they more interesting, but I think we do learn a lot more. If something worked, you know that it worked once, but you don't know how close you were to that failing. And that kind of brings in something we talk about sometime in there too, is complacency. And I go back to when my first job was at Morton Thiokol Corporation, and so I was there when the Challenger exploded. And because it had worked, everyone assumed that it would keep working. And so as every successful flight went on, the level of complacency went up until eventually you had a failure. So what you were talking about earlier about statistical, you've got to make sure that it worked, but also statistically that it worked as often as you want it to work.
We fail more often than we succeed. So if you don't learn from that failure, then you're probably doing something wrong. Or at least you're not trying to learn at that point.
How does one determine if the cost of the product or process will be a barrier to a success? And another way to ask this is, what is the cost benefit of it, and how do you determine if it's worthwhile to pursue?
Heart disease in this country and globally is a major public health problem. And not only is it fiscally demanding, it's socially demanding. I mean, people and their quality of life deteriorates rapidly, and when they get to the point of heart failure, that's well, it's an irreversible process from the beginning, right? So if we can, and there's no treatment for it, so it's inevitable decline. So if we can catch it early, we can reduce the progression. But to be able to reduce it greatly would be so valuable for preserving quality of life and longevity. And I think that would be immensely valuable. So I think that there is a great desire to find something that would be able to do that. And so I'm hopeful that I will be able to keep that moving in that direction.
Other than cost, what are the limitations in moving from plastic to metal 3D printing? And if pursued, would this offer the potential for engineering breakthroughs not otherwise possible based on available resources
Yes,
in Eastern North Carolina?
perhaps. Actually, I have my props here. I haven't gotten to use that. But in one class that we're doing now, we printed this little bracket, and we've given the students directions to model and, again, with finite element analysis, figure out where this is going to break, and then we actually print them and break them. Then give the students the challenge of trying to reproduce this. Still got to maintain a certain load, still got to limit it on deflection, but they're trying to squeeze as much weight out of it as they can. Now, I guess when I was a student, if I came up with something like that, I'd say, well, you can't make this, in production. But I think we're maybe a decade away from where, yeah, with a metal printer, I think I had someone tell me that complexity is free when you do that, which is a good way of looking at it. All these little holes that are in there would cost you a lot if you had to machine them in, but if you're printing them, they don't cost any extra. So we're trying to get our students to think, well, I hate to use the term outside the box, but that's exactly what we're trying to get them to do. It's like they'll have a different set of constraints to work with when they start doing the metal 3D printing. That'll be quite different than what we're used to working with. But we're seeing that start to happen. I know Curran's going to be working at GE, and GE's probably one of the leaders in that, where they've started to make some very complex metal printed parts in their jet engines, very specialized parts, ones that would be very high cost to do otherwise. But again, when we're talking about some of these students are going to be 40 years career, you know that somewhere along that way, they're going to be doing things a lot differently than we've been doing. So how far away are we? I'm not sure, but it's getting there, and right now cost is the biggest issue. Yeah.
How important is it to be able to commercialize your idea? Does everything need to be commercialized, or is knowledge enough?
I'd say knowledge is great, but does it help anyone besides you? I mean, if you can't make something out of it, the knowledge, again, is great, but you should move that in a way that is beneficial outside of your brain. For me, it's everything. In graphic design, it's got to be commercialized because we work for clients. If I just make something, if I'm experimenting with forms, or if I experiment with how much of a letter form you need to see so you can still read a word, that's great for me to know at what point can I apply this. Is it in some kind of environmental graphic where that is commercialized? Maybe, but it's there in a way that I could ostensibly use it outside of just knowing it. But I think maybe not commercialized, but making it a reality, I think, is more important than just having the knowledge.
There's so much we don't know. And so knowledge is the blocks of putting things together, to piece together what it is, how it is that we work, how it is the way that the world works. And so while commercialization of any one person's knowledge is what we all aim for, if somebody later on or now were to take the science that I'm doing and build on it in a different way that I hadn't thought of and be able to get that to commercialization where it would then be able to benefit people, then it is useful. So it really, I mean, it depends on that context.
And I would say in engineering, we don't do maybe as much, certainly basic research as in the natural sciences, but most of what we do as applied research is based on what was done as maybe pure research without a commercial end from years or decades ago. So I'm glad there are some funding agencies that want to fund pure research. You know.
There are, and there are increasingly more. Actually, the traditional tracks for funding, when we were talking about being able to acquire funds to do the work that we're doing, there are more foundations that have funding available now that are geared toward higher risk things, because there is so much that we don't know, and there's so much more that people are finding out that is outside the realm of what we thought possible. And so there are avenues to pursue funding from foundations that will support that kind of work.
So we're building our innovation economy. That's our goal here in Eastern North Carolina, and that's the mission here at ECU. I don't know how many of you paid much attention to the Board of Trustees meeting last week beyond the naming of the ACOC dorm, but one thing that was big news for us is that ECU received approval from the Board of Trustees to begin planning on its Millennial Campus. Now, what does that mean, Millennial Campus? North Carolina legislature has passed some laws that allow the campuses to develop space that will allow public-private partnerships. So we can partner with industry on campus in these spaces, and we don't have to worry about things like maybe Umstead Act and other things that people are kind of risk averse to. So what's kind of exciting here about our Millennial Campus Act that was passed by the Board of Trustees last week is that that's going to open up 5 areas on campus in Greenville, and there's even one site located in Eastern North Carolina out towards Manio. So that's going to open space up where we're going to have students, faculty, people from the community, industry that can all come on board together and start developing these ideas and projects and not have to worry about, are we using public money or not? This is very exciting to us, and we're just can't wait for it to begin. Now, the next step is it has to go to the Board of Governors. I don't anticipate any problem with that, but keep tuned into that because that'll be very exciting news. I want to thank Barbara, Yitka, Ed, and Dan for joining us today and kind of getting us thinking, using those creative juices. You know, we've been using those juices, coming up with ideas, but what's next? You're going to have to keep testing those ideas, keep working at it, and failure may come now, it may come later, and what you do with that failure is kind of up to what your vision is. So I've found from my experience here in the Tech Transfer Office that our most productive inventors are the most irritating people on campus because they won't take no for an answer. Not that you're irritating, yeah, because I love you to death. But
Thanks, Marty.
but they are persistent. They are very persistent, and those are the ones who are going to succeed. So thank you here for being here and helping produce that, build that dialogue here. I also want to thank Research and Graduate Studies for their part in the program, the Office of Innovation and Economic Development, ECU TV, who's been filming these series, and we've been able to put those on our website so we can engage people beyond us. Aramark, and then also my staff, Lucretia Davis and Carlisle Rogers, because we couldn't have done this session or this entire series without any of you. Now, what do we have in the queue that's coming up? Next month on March the 20th, Friday, March the 20th, we've got an intellectual property session focused. We've got 2 attorneys coming in. We've got Shauna Lemon coming from Myers-Beagle, Sibley, and Sedgwick out of Raleigh. She's a patent attorney. She does a lot of our biotech-related patents. We also have Will Cannon from the firm Parker Poe, who does a lion's share of ECU's trademark activities and copyright when we need that. We're going to talk about patents, trademarks, copyrights and trade secrets at this session. So if you've got something you want to learn about that, that's a good opportunity to come join. We're also going to have an ECU inventor join us and try to tell his perspective and what the importance of wrapping this intellectual property protection around their idea. And then I have another treat coming up for you as well. On Monday, March the 23rd, we've got a patent examiner coming from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office at noontime. Now, you'll note that that's Research Week. I know Research Week is jam-packed full of activities, but we found a little hole in the week on Monday at lunchtime. It's going to be over at Mendenhall. And just stay tuned because we'll get more information out that. But I think it'll be kind of interesting to hear the side of the patent examiner and what he's looking at. So thank you all for being here. And if you would, please give a round of applause to our panelists for being here today. They'll be here if you want to mill around and talk with them. Also, I think that Curran is going to demonstrate what the MakerBot was working on in the corner. And then also on this table right here next to the MakerBot are just some examples of things that have gone through the iterative process, that proof of concept process that you may find of interest. Thank you.